In homeschooling, the standard of educational excellence is not lowered, but the pathway towards that standard can be varied and, we believe, a more enlightened path. So, what is this more enlightened path? This presentation is about the basics or foundational skills a child learns from 0 to 12 years and beyond. It is a distillation of information from many readings, research, parenting, and homeschooling books, along with shared experiences of homeschooling parents and educators. So before we begin, let's define some terms that might be referred to or implied in our discussion. Natural learning is a concept that I always mention in my TESOL and IELTS courses and homeschooling webinars. Natural learning is the acquisition process of knowledge through observation, exposure, and varied experiences, as well as interactive and communication practices. So it is how a child naturally acquires language and all associated cognitive and affective knowledge and skills. Explicit teaching, on the other hand, is the learning process akin to a classroom experience, or like when one is tutored. It is a structured, deliberate presentation of knowledge and often comes with formal assessment, as in, quizzes and exams. Traditional school follows the structure of mass education. So it's whether face-to-face or online. So where a group of students is explicitly taught the same concepts. Again, for the most part in this pandemic, even though studying happens at home, it is still considered traditional if the learning process mimics that of a school, such as having classes most days of the week, following subject per subject schedule, and addressing a large number of students at the same pace and, the same assessments. Homeschooling considers the unique learning of the child from the basics and beyond. And that is what we will mostly talk about in this session. Let's talk about the basics. According to child developmental specialists, most children learn nearly half of all they will ever learn from the time they are 4 or 5 years old. So from a holistic view, homeschooling started since birth because learning even, began before birth. There's a reason why Robert Fulghum claims that everything he needed to know he learned in kindergarten. The child's wondrous progress from helpless newborn to a remarkably sophisticated 5-year-old happens mostly without explicit teaching. So in view of that, many parents are very successful at raising their kids until they are 5, but feel somehow inadequate to the task of educating them as they grow older. Now, the notion that parents cannot effectively teach their children once they reach school age, probably stemmed from the time when many were illiterate. But not today. Now, parents are more than capable of providing their children with education basics, than individuals with license or credentials. All that is necessary are appropriate learning materials and opportunities on one hand, and a nurturing environment on the other. Of course, these vary with the age, needs, interests, and abilities of the child. Here are just some examples of activities and materials we can give children in their approximate ages. Again, this is mercurial, so it can be adjusted. So remember that the purpose of exposure is to encourage growth. So do not overdo it and overwhelm the children. Let them keep the wonder and wait for their questions, if there are any. Early hands-on experience of this kind teaches the importance of patience, perseverance, and skills. So natural science projects can be managing an ant farm, or a bug collection, or woodworking, or caring and feeding the family dog or cat. A child who plants and tends even the smallest garden may discover more about science and natural processes. But then because of it, they learn diligence and responsibility. Most of these interests may be left behind as the child matures, but their impact, the development of attitudes and behaviors that will serve them later in life, will endure. The book Homeschooling for Excellence by Mickey and David Colfax, published in the 80s, offers insights in natural homeschooling. Now, David and Mickey did not really plan to homeschool, but it just turned out that way. They have 4 boys, 2 biological sons, Grant and Drew, and 2 adopted boys, Reed from an African ancestry and Garth, a Native American. Sharing some images of their family life here. They lived in a farm and by their accounts saw that both nature and nurture contribute to growth and outcomes because 2 of the sons are adopted. Their experience somewhat embodied urban and rural homeschooling. Now, one very important discernment they shared in this book is the recognition of individual differences in terms of learning readiness. Okay, let's see. Grant, the eldest, was a late reader. Learning to read simply wasn't important with many things going on in the family at that time. So not until he was 9, when he wanted to know more about the Pomo Indians, which required that he learn to read, did he read? So motivated, he was reading college-level anthropology monographs within a year and was writing short stories based upon his reading. Now, Reed, in contrast, learned to read at 4. Partly because he had, an older brother as a role model, maybe. And Drew and Garth, for no discernible reason, learned to read at the normal ages of 6 and 7 and seemed no better or worse for the experience than their divergently different brothers. Now let's talk about the 3 R's. So many will ask, when should children learn to read and write and do early math? Well, insightful educators and experienced homeschooling parents who understand that children mature at different rates and have different talents and interests that affect reading readiness or math readiness or writing readiness, are not really bothered by the when. The only question for them is, what are the best materials that I can use to teach my child reading, writing, and math skills efficiently and as painlessly as possible? Okay, so just remember that learning tools must be creative or allows you and your child to be creative. It must also be accessible. So if it's online, consider your connectivity, or if printed, consider its affordability. And lastly, it should be trustworthy, coming from good authors and publishers and sources. Okay, you can also, of course, use anything and everything around your environment or your surrounding. Functional, realistic learning tools. They are learning for the world anyway. On reading. A child who has been read to, who has been exposed to books, and who has been provided with different kinds of support and experiences will almost certainly learn to read and write with relatively little effort. The best way to foster an appreciation of reading, of course, is to read aloud to young children. Start with picture books and move on to more challenging materials later. Endeavor to provide children with an appreciation for reading more than the acquisition of skills. So the child who is exposed to books at an early age, who sees, his or her parents reading, who is read to, and who is encouraged to spend time with picture books will all but certainly become a reader in due course. So how and when this occurs will vary from child to child, and from family to family. So there is no conclusive evidence that the acquisition of reading skills at an early age is directly related to later intellectual attainment. We would caution against overloading the child with materials that are more appropriate to the classroom than to learning. Age-graded readers of the kind are suggested but not imposed, as some may be helpful to one child but not to another. A good rule of thumb is to proceed through any given series one book at a time, and to be prepared to abandon it and look for alternatives if for one reason or another it doesn't work. Iwan nyo. And this continues as the child grows in terms of interest and general knowledge. On writing, so not penmanship, but rather the development of the ability to communicate in writing. Now, there are many books that are well done and are quite useful. I'm an English teacher. So unfortunately, most of them address those who have had at least some writing experience and need to just sharpen their skills. So where does the child with no experience in writing begin? Okay, so it is merely a matter of providing the child with 1, examples, 2, opportunities, and 3, incentive to write. So as simple as the following: scribbles, daily journal, copy work, letter writing, and note writing. Now, the Colfax children began by keeping a daily journal almost from the time they were able to pick up a pencil or crayon. So they started with giving, titles to their drawings. Kunyari, stick drawing, mom, and a drawing of a house, and then they will write a house or whatever. And of course, copying words printed on a separate paper. So before too long, they would be, writing entries on their own, like so. Another real-world activity that effectively fostered, writing skills, according to the Colfaxes, both in form and in content, was letter writing and note writing. So the process is like, the parent would carefully print out what the child wanted to say, which, the child would then copy. From the account of the Colfaxes and many other experienced homeschoolers, so it should be clear that learning to read and write should be a pleasant and uncomplicated experience and need not resemble the frustrating and painful process it so often becomes in a traditional school setting. Kasi may comparison, may competition, at may pressure. Dapat wala. So, we also, of course, have to stress individual differences. So not only will children learn at different ages, as we have already noted, but they will, in all likelihood, manifest different levels of interest in reading, and perhaps even more so in writing. They will really have different pacing, and it is fine. Your only concern would be to find out if there is a developmental order, of some kind. But you would know that also as a parent, instinctively. Okay, it is more important to provide the child with a sense of accomplishment and to build self-esteem than to overload him or her with endless exercises to learn the rules of writing, especially in the early years. So on arithmetic, it is the most intimidating of the 3 R's, well, at least to me, and perhaps for good reason. So many of us remember many days of doing page after page of math problems and exercises. But, the general objectives are clear enough. Children need to be able to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with reasonable speed and accuracy. But one cannot justifiably attempt to dictate just how fast, how accurate, or when these skills should be in place. Okay, why? So one of the primary functions of grade school math and, doing many exercises is to sort and track a large number of students rather than impart analytic or reasoning skills. Think 25, 40, 50 students in a class, they really need sorting. Otherwise, as a teacher, you'd go crazy. But since the homeschooled child does not need to be sorted or tracked, time can be spent providing both computational and reasoning skills without overloading him or her with alienating busy work. The usual toddler items, blocks, puzzles, and books will go a long way in stimulating interest in mathematical relationships and concepts. Experienced homeschoolers suggest that children should be exposed to math very early and very gently, so that over the early childhood years, it becomes, regarded as, well, if not exactly fun, at least interesting, unintimidating, and even challenging. So learn to read and read to learn. To clinch, we can benefit from the wisdom of Ruth Beechick when she said, "Let us teach children to read the natural way so that they can read to learn in the fondest and most effective way." Now, even Sir Karl Popper stated this in his book, Unended Quest. "The 3 R's," he said, "are the only essentials a child has to be taught. And some children do not even need to be taught in order to learn these. Everything else is atmosphere and learning through reading and thinking." So really keep it simple. But is this enough? Well, yes. There is plenty of time between infancy and adolescence to acquire basic reading, writing, and computational skills, and too much too soon, in an effort to conform to norms and fill the space of childhood, prevents the child to set his or her own pace, follow his or her own lead, and most importantly, keep the spark of interest alive through these early, terribly impressionable years. So too much of what is imposed upon the child is in fact a mechanism for sorting children into organizationally manageable categories: the bright, the average, and the slow. Okay, more insights, or at least I reiterate some. These are from veteran homeschoolers from the 80s to the present. Okay, for them, number 1, most of the early reading and early math products are overpriced, gimmicky, and of little value. Number 2, reading, writing, and arithmetic workbooks are designed to meet classroom needs of occupying time than with providing real skills. And number 3, far less time and effort are needed to provide children with the basics than publishers, are inclined to admit. A few books and projects will suffice to provide the child with the basics to prepare them for higher order learning and thinking. Foundation skills are not really that long and complex to teach as what those with, vested interest would have us believe. Think business. Okay, so let's talk about beyond basics. Okay, once basic reading, writing, and computational skills are in place, generally around the age of 10 or 12, the child is ready for new challenges. The child and the parents should be open to locate materials that will serve interest and facilitate growth. Now, this is admittedly not an easy task. But at this juncture, parental involvement in the actual, content of the education typically declines, and the quality and content of subjects are left to the authorities. So what do I mean by this? So for example, English grammar. So grammar may be systematically examined approximately at the ages between 10 to 12 years old. So you can check out my videos on the best way to teach words and their functions here. But the parent who has routinely corrected the child's written and spoken English over the years will have provided a sense of proper usage. So for mastery, the 6-volume English Grammar and Composition series by John E. Warriner, spread over 6 years, provides the child with superior language skills. It is really very comprehensive, and the whole series would probably have like 3,000 pages. It begins with the first course that can be used by younger teenagers without assistance, and concludes with a complete course for the college-bound senior. So the series is rigorous, comprehensive, and authoritative. Not really good, actually. So you take it in small doses, but you can be selective. So my daughter and I, for example, ignored the composition exercises and came up with a lighter version of them. So that's why we have the unboxing series courses and the writing 100 series that we share with our victorious homeschoolers. So these are, just mere suggestions, more illustrative, and should be considered only if they work for you and your children. Writing, English composition. So by the age of 10 or 12, the child who has kept a journal and written letters can benefit from exposure of writing books. No. Foremost among these is the Williams Trunk and E.B. White Little Classic, The Elements of Style. It's a paperback of some 75 pages, and it is a book for younger as well as older children. I always urge my students to read, reread, and read it yet again as they grow older. A close second is William Zinsser's On Writing Well, which is especially useful in showing the young writer how to edit his or her writing and in explaining why this is important. So this, like Strunk and White, is a book to be read and reread over these formative years. Now, if writing is not turned into an ordeal, children will not really find it difficult to write. Although learning to write well will ordinarily take some time and practice. Okay, but what about the teenager who cannot seem to get anything good or bad down on paper? Yung di talaga nagsusulat. Okay, so I would recommend Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones with its reassuring trust yourself approach. Sulat mo lang kung ano yung gusto mo. And it may be useful. If not, well, time and the development of interests and experiences that are felt to be worth writing about may be all that are necessary. On mathematics and science, okay, so again, if the groundwork has been laid, combined with a rich mix of special activities, projects, and general reading, any child will thrive well into these areas in their teenage years. So, science books, videos that inspire wonder, experiments, sky observatory, field trips, observing conceptual approach of Singaporean math, or even, the classic Saxon math. KhanAcademy.com, learning apps such as BrainPop, and perhaps, your trusted tutor can help continue and foster education. So what about physical education, music, art, health, home economics, and all the other requirements of the conventional curriculum? They are very important, of course, but homeschoolers will define these in different ways. It is up to you to decide what form of physical education you'll take, for example, and whether it is better to learn to play the piano or to learn art history or sew or cross-stitch or cook. The possibilities are endless. So in the years between childhood and adulthood, there is more than enough time to acquire skills and knowledge in many different ways. Patience, informed by a recognition of individual differences, will prove more effective than the best of texts insensitively imposed. The whole point of this session is to encourage flexibility rather than, blindly follow directives on how to homeschool your child. Your primary consideration should be 1, your child's learning style and pacing, 2, your child's interests and leanings, and 3, your family situation. Nobody would judge you on how you go about it, and nobody should. Now, beyond homeschooling, so our goal in homeschooling has always been to educate our children to facilitate the development of intellect and character, and not merely to prepare them for college or a career. But it will always seem that our homeschooling is put to the test when our children take college exams or go through the admissions process. Now, I'll talk about this, in the Philippine context later on. Pang Pilipinas, mamaya. But for now, let's find out what happened to the Colfaxes. So remember, they homeschooled in a farm, in what is considered a countryside. Okay, so this is Dr. Grant and Colfax with President Barack Obama in the Red Room of the White House. This is the eldest. He, at 2016, was given the responsibility of researching for the management and cure of AIDS. And right now, at present, he is also part of the team that manages and finds the cure for COVID-19. So this is Dr. Grant N. Colfax. He graduated cum laude from Harvard Medical School, and he was a Fulbright scholar. He is an infectious disease specialist. John Drew Colfax, the second child, earned an MA in biological anthropology, a law degree, and an MD from Harvard. He worked his way through medical school as a lawyer. The third child, he's the one that adopted from the African ancestry, has an AB from Harvard University, where he graduated cum laude and a law degree from Yale University. He specializes in civil rights litigation. And Garth Colfax, the adopted child from American Indian ancestry, works with developmentally disabled people in Sacramento, California, and is a computer and technology enthusiast who explores presentation literacy. Okay, so, wow, right? But no matter. They're Americans. What about here in the Philippines? What about university preparedness? Okay. So in our country, we put so much value to the college diploma, so it will always feel like our homeschooling effort will go up against the real test when our children take entrance exams to enter college. Now, if you must prepare your child, let him or her test herself using free online resources for SAT and Philippine equivalent review materials and mock tests, by grade 9 or so. Academic writing should also be addressed if your child intends to go to college. Or have him or her enroll in a review class. So that's what my daughter did. Now, I've been coaching and mentoring high schoolers, a number of them homeschoolers, since 2010. And many were successful in their own ways. But their stories are not mine to tell. Instead, I will tell you about Amber. She took the Ateneo ASET and UPCAT exams and passed both. Except for a few years in grade school, she was fully homeschooled until grade 12. She mostly studied on her own in high school. She checked her own tests, computed her own grades, enrolled herself in various free and paid online courses, earned herself a teaching certificate at 16, and began teaching right after. She got herself certified as a Google trainer. She bought her own laptop and Cintiq. And, well, we still consider her lazy and pagong because she usually wakes up just in time for lunch. And she considers herself a potato, whatever that means. There are some aspects of her I still can understand. Okay, now, was Amber extraordinarily smart? Not really. And she's the first to admit that. At grade 1, she could hardly read. At grade 4, she hasn't mastered her arithmetic. We started formally, at least enrolled her in homeschooling then, At grade 5, di pa po niya kabisado ang multiplication. Siyempre, hindi rin siya marunong ng division. Her writing skills were not decent as well. So, she had help learning the basics. But, once I knew her comprehension skills were good, before she turned grade 7, I let go. And that's when she started to figure out so many things on her own. Now, had she been in a traditional school, she would not have been free to do the things she did. Now, all by God's grace, of course. She is now a freshman in UP, a freelance system designer, an ESL teacher, and a recording engineer. She is our IT officer and the kids' teacher, Amber. So if I should describe her in one word, it is problem solver. But more important, she is kind, inclusive, God-fearing, and willing to help others. So I would like to emphasize that homeschooling should not be considered a success or failure on the basis of whether or not a child is admitted to a particular college or university. Homeschooling has different objectives derived from the interests and needs of the children and parents. So it's like reading the Bible. You know, homeschooling is like that. You need to read it and be reminded again and again constantly. In homeschooling, you need to do the same. Be reminded of its principle to keep the faith, your whys and your goals, and you thrive when you share your journey with others. So, be informed or reminded. Number 1, let your little one play to seriously learn. Commit quality time to have conversations with your child, play with your child, get to know your child. No matter your situation, even if you're working full-time, there's always an opportunity for that. Allow exploration and support his or her interests. Kahit nagbabago yung interest niya every month or even every week. Observe and be attuned to your child's readiness. Pag tumanggi yan mag-aral sa isang particular subject, baka hindi pa siya handa. Iwan nyo muna, balikan nyo. Now, your child is not ahead or behind, but with you now. Don't pressure your child to be more academically advanced for your own pride, but strive to be supportive and encouraging, balancing freedom and discipline. Now, I'm sorry that doesn't sound inspiring, but parenting really is a trial and error for all of us. That's why we can benefit from shared experiences and research and sessions like this, where we get to talk. So some parents are scared to homeschool because they feel they might mess up their kids. Baka hindi ko kaya, hindi ko maturuan, hindi ko mabigyan ng oras. Decision siya eh. So parenting feels that way at certain times. But really, you were able to navigate childbirth, the first diaper change, the first time your child got sick, the first time your child ate solid food, and all the other first times. All first times are uncomfortable. O diba? Homeschooling is the same. It can take a year or more to find your homeschooling rhythm. So big life transitions take time. So use the principle of observation and correction. When something doesn't work, don't overgeneralize and decide, homeschooling doesn't work. Or teacher, titigil na kami mag-homeschool kasi hindi nag-work sa amin. Kasi may work po ako eh. Okay, there's really something wrong there. But, again, like I said, it might not fit you, but it is a decision that has to be made thoughtfully. Now, homeschooling offers us a tremendous opportunity to cultivate the virtues of independence and original thinking. Ayan, independence and original thinking. So these qualities are not measured by tests or exams. Marami sa mga tinuturo natin, they are not quantifiable, they are not really measurable by all of these standardized quizzes and tests. But independence and original thinking, these qualities are just as socially important as a vaccine or cure for COVID-19. Thank you for being here for your child. Because of that, you know how to be victorious.